Hello and welcome to another video on the Intermediate React version 5. This is a course taught by Brian Holt. Shout out to Brian Holt, software engineer that has previously worked at Microsoft, Netflix, Reddit. Currently he's working at Snowflake as a PM, and now he moved on to Mexico to work on other adventures and ventures. So the reason of today's video is to make a quick recap of two particular courses and then go into the actual topic of today's video, which is the Advanced React Performance Code Splitting. To make myself familiar with all of this terminology, and especially when you need to talk to a client, tech client, you know what you gotta do. And you know how to express when it comes to face a problem. So, all right. So this is the second part of a course where we look at this is the intro, the complete intro to React, which is a course also taught by Brian Holt. And in this case, the idea here behind that is to understand what React does, how do we get here, and then understand the core concepts, the value proposition of React, where you have states that you want to generate view out of it. All right, so that's what React actually does. That's the value proposition. And when it comes to say, okay, once I know this, how it works, how React actually works, by re-rendering components. That's the entire job of React. So the value proposition is that you want to generate views out of a state. You got in a state that you want to generate view out of it, and the way you do that is by rendering components, rendering elements on the browser. So that's pretty much what we did here in this first course, in the complete intro to React. So understand is how do we start using that with our CDN, and then set up and toolings like that. So for example, what do we need right now, or at least at the time of the video recording, which is 2020, I think it is published. Yeah, that code was published. I didn't put that, no problem, but that code was published on 2020. And the idea behind that is to say, okay, so now we're going to look at step by step what are the things that we need to do. Understand is how do we start to get React in our browser, how can we interact with the React browser, how can also we can is starting to create elements. After all, we are actually interacting with the React library as a way to tell to programmatically create elements. And then the tools that we're going to use here as we create as we create is our components, or as we interact with React. So for example, look at the current way of doing that using functional approach, or by creating your elements with that. And then couple things that, especially when you're working with code, is like, does it code work? Does it compile? Can I read your code? And this is the three metric that he used, and I really love it completely, man. I don't care anything else. I don't care anything else. Can I read your code? Does your work? Does your code works? Does it compile? Period. And then, well, look at the other tools that we need to get familiar with. So not only first to understand how what React does, but also how you can start to work with pure React components, or the components, the functional components, and then using npm prettier as a way to give code formatting, ESLinting as a way to follow is the help you to fix common JavaScript problems, and then down the line we're gonna see how to do is unit testing and TypeScript, and how we set up here with our dev server using Vite instead of Webpack. And because Vite is now this next generation of front-end tooling that actually make the life of our development much more easy. The development loop back, or the development feedback loop, the development feedback loop is quite fast. So now that we look at the different tools, the other is the core concepts. Remember, this is something very, very important, especially if you're going to develop React applications per se. So these core React concepts here is like, what is JSX? Which is, instead of us telling React to create elements for ourselves, would it be better to have just a particular way to just write HTML extender or JavaScript extending in this case? That's why we have is JSX. It might look ugly, but at the end of the day, we have to understand how do we get here. Okay, so JSX. Then we look at hooks, especially on the functional approach. So what is hooks? And again, hooks are just states that React track, and when you change them, it will re-render the component. There's some caveat to work with, okay, as we take a look at this, and how you can, for example, by using JSX with hook, there's some reserved keywords that we need to make sure to understand that, because again, we are using is JSX, this JavaScript extend with HTML. Okay, so very important thing to know is when a component renders in the case of React. That's the core idea. Remember about the value proposition and the what React does. So we also look at the hooks, the QA like that. So you have to be very careful at which event you state is bound to, especially when you are wants to tell, hey, I want to know when this state will change, because behind the scenes you can trigger unwanted re-rendering when that happens. So the value proposition of React, of that, and especially as you grow and create more complex applications, especially for back office or for web internals, okay, it's important to know when a component re-renders, how to maintain a code base, and how to keep up to date your knowledge. So here we look at, well, hooks, mapping through data with hooks, a very important concept that can lead you to a lot of trouble, unnecessary or not, if you understand that. So effects is just a way of how you can perform side effects. In other words, is that how you can now run or a trigger a re-render when something outside of the re-render happens. Or in other words, it's like, for example, when you want to re-render data once you fetch from a server. When you fetch data from a server, that's the way of how you can re-render, or how you trigger a re-render. And also you have to be careful, especially here, is when this happen. So in the case of use effects, if you don't pass anything like this, you're telling to re-render anytime this component is rendered. And that's what you have to be careful about that. This component will render anytime, this component will render anytime this component will render like this, because after all that's what use effect is doing. So if use effect is running every time you re-render the application by default. So if you put a use effect, this is what it's gonna do by default. For our case, we don't want that any kind of behavior. Why? Because once you do, for example, this here, where you're saying, hey, let's go to fetch that data, and then we're gonna set that, you effectively break your browser. And trust me that you don't want that kind of thing. So you did that. You did that. Exactly as with the here is that therefore React now re-render this component and use effect gets called again, creating an effective loop which bombards the API with API requests, as you can see. So how can we prevent that? Well, by adding is at the second parameter of the use effect, this array where here you're telling, hey, I just want to render this component is initially once. Okay, I just want you to run this component once. If you pass, for example, values here, they will run only this component whenever those dependencies change, whenever those state change. So now here we effectively are mutating is, or re-render these applications only once, the first time. That's great. And also here, as you can see here, we define is our pulling data, fetch data here. This is known as the control forms, because here you are binding is any state to a particular input change. But because again, this is not actually best practice, in fact this is something that is not recommended by React. It's just also a way to how you can see how this work as a way to avoid it. Then we look at custom hooks, which what allows you to is pull data to abstract logic into their own files. You have to be careful about how much data you want to extract here. Custom hooks are most likely used for fetching data. Okay, that's one of the main use cases for that. And as you can see here, we talk about is the uncontrolled form. Then I also look at a control form in a succinct way, which is pretty much using the form API that are building into it. So with this, it'll make our life much more simpler when it comes to manage data in a form as well as submit it. There's also libraries for that are very helpful because most of the time, the vast majority of most of the time we're going to do is the forms or lists as a software developer. So yes, This is also mentioned about the value proposition of effects or hooks. When are we going to use these hooks? So for example, on animations, so any side effects. And common side effects are network operations, rendering animations, DOM interactions, local storage, and event handling. This is just common example of when we use effects for that. This is just an example for that. Handling user inputs, which is something that is part of this. How can we handle this user inputs to then create the individual tests, reusable tests for that. And also the component compositions. This handling user inputs review is just a way of what are the events that you can use, and also the wrapper events that React provide to us, these synthetic events. The component composition, which is, hey, you know what? If you want to make your life much more easy to maintain, make your components around 60 to 90 lines of codes. More than that is not recommended, especially for readability and reusability, you know, because if you do too much decomposition, then you have all of these nested components that React have to render through all of that. So you don't want that. So again, you have to find is the right balance for that. So far, then we look at how can we style our components. Okay, so far so good. And also the React Dev tools. How can we make use of that? And some notes about that. For example, at the node environment as a way to build your applications environment driven. Okay, and in the meantime, use something called the strict mode, which is part of the strict mode, which is part of the way of how you can use React as a way to detect is there any re-rendering along your three components, and if it is, well, it throws you a warning. The problem is that because it's now triggered this twice, this re-rendering, this because it's checking is this effectively, okay, because it have to run this initialization twice to see if you're truly stateless. So if you check that, what's happening is that it have to do this twice. So if you are doing network operations, you're gonna see that twice in their console tab or in your network tab, which is something that it can be problematic. It can lead to confusion. So again, Brian Hall mentioned that he doesn't use that because of that issue. But yes, the TLDR of all of this, all right, is that the React core concepts is a way to say, hey, GSX, why do we use GSX? What are hooks? Why we use effect? How can we create our custom hooks? Okay, how can we now iterate to elements using maps? How can we handle user inputs, as well as the difference between the control forms and uncontrolled forms, component compositions, some recommendation of how you can write your components, or guidance how you can style your components, as well as the React Dev Tools and some notes about it. This is the core according to Brian Holt. JSX, hooks, custom hooks, how you, JSX, hooks, use effect, or aka custom hooks, okay, as well as handling user inputs, understand the difference between uncontrolled form and control form, rendering elements, okay, using map, as well as the component composition, some guideline, especially when you're going to build your components, how bigger or smaller, okay, style your components, and then the React Dev Tools. So we got right now 9 principles here, okay? So that's interesting, that's powerful as well. So JSX, hooks, user effect, custom hooks, handling user inputs, form and uncontrolled form, the subtle difference of that, component composition, some guidelines on how to build them, as well as style your components, how to render elements in a component, list of elements, and then the React Dev Tools. So 10 topics here, which summarize a lot, the core of React. And not only that, but also how you're going to provide value to the client. All right, that's good. That's good. Remember that after all, especially if you're working for a company, that's the entire reason why they are paying for. What is the value that you can provide to them? Because as an employee, you are going to get hired. So you're going to exchange is your skill set, time, and expertise for their systems, their security, and their exposure. So, okay. Then we look at the React capabilities. Just to make a quick recap of this, this is, for example, the use or the React router, and how this React router is especially for creating is client-side applications. You can also create that for SEO to improve that. There are also some other wrappers around React that allow you to do this, for example, like Next.js. But in this case, it's for example creating is this client-side navigation. You may wonder why. That's out of the topic of this project and on this course. A quick explanation here can be a quick recap of that is that the way how these web applications work in the past, how slow they were, and how slow it was. Yeah, how slow it was by having to, anytime you click on a link, you have to do a full reload or full refresh. So making it so the user experience was quite slow for that. So the idea here is that only fetch the necessary data while refreshing so when making quick refresh on your web applications. So the idea here is that reduce the time that you have to interact with your web applications, improve faster response, and improve the user experience. So because of that, now they create this particular way of how you can do that, this industry standard. All right, so far so good. This is React router in a nutshell. The people that build React router now is also building something called Remix, which is another framework here, like Remix.js. Yeah, thank you, but not that kind of Remix. Yes, this one, like Remix.js. Okay. This is a new this new hot and up and coming framework that is competing in the fields of Gatsby and Next.js. Okay. The great thing of this is that, for example, Shopify developers will now, Shopify developers will say, hey, they can now benefit from that because Shopify now has embraced, Shopify now has embraced is Remix.js as their framework to go with. That's interesting. That's good. That's good. Okay. So this is one of the React capabilities, React Router. Then we have React Query, which is something that now they are using in enterprise companies or in enterprise web apps. So for example, the company that I'm currently working, they're using that, and I really love they use that because it makes my life much more simpler, especially for data management, updating, syncing, and catching. Okay. So all right. So that's the core of React Query. Okay. And also, another important thing here to recap, especially when you're going to write your React applications, long-term maintainable React code value proposition. So because we look at React Router and React Query, what are the benefits that we can get from it? Okay, we are adding this layer of abstraction. So if you want to have a happy life with your React development, the hardest part of React is the use effect. Okay, because with that you have to know is when that happen, when does this effect happen, and does this cascade to other effects. So this is one of the things here. So minimize effects in your codes. So this is a very loosely rule from Brian Holtz. In other words, try to make your applications, if they have to handle, if they need to handle several use, if they need to handle, for example, if your application needs to take care several side effects, as we mentioned before. So for example, let's say is the animation or the local storage, network operations, DOM manipulations, or JavaScript events. So the idea here is that if you find yourself using that, make your use effects self-contained as much as possible. Try to contain them into small testable areas. This is also part of the pain points of Brian Holtz. And also is that and also a word of abstraction. This is part of the React capabilities. Not only anytime you're going to add new features to your applications, so for example, React Router or React Query, two things to note, especially here. First, if you want to have a happy life, or the secret of long-term maintainable React code is to keep use effect as minimal as possible. So keep your use effect small as possible. This is a very loosely coupled rule, and if you find yourself in the need of using that, then create a self-contained use effect. It can be tested easily. Okay, contain them into small testable areas. And another thing is the abstractions. A word on abstractions. Abstraction is generally your enemy when you want to write good maintainable code. And when I see Brian Hall's face describing that to me, was like, holy shit. My friend. Okay, so this is it. All right, then we look at what is the uncontrolled form. Is to let the browsers do the heavy lifting for us. And class component as a way to see, hey, how do we get here? What we're using is this particular approach, how we did the things in the past, what are the subtle difference between class and functional. Okay, so or class and functional components. So for example, in the class you have much more fine control about when things need to get rendered. And then you're not able, for example, in the class to for example, in functional, the subtle difference between functional versus class component is that if you want to fine-grain performance optimizations. Another word on optimization. Premature optimizations can be the root of all evils. Okay? A very good note. All right. Okay. And then, just to recap these React capabilities, okay, so what are the things that you can add? What are the trade-offs when you add things like that? Okay, so first, React query, React router, how to have a happy life, or the secret of long-term maintainable, or the secret of long-term maintainable React code, which is a very loose rule that is minimize the use effects in your code. If you can, so contain it into a small testable areas. And then a word on abstractions. Too much abstractions or abstraction is usually the enemy of the good maintainable code. Abstraction is generally your enemy when you want to write good maintainable code. That's one of the things that a lot of these people that say, hey, for example, tech lead, software engineering, that kind of thing. It's like, hey, I come with this solution, I come with these abstractions that now people that are behind me, or juniors, not behind me, people that are new into the field, they need to know a lot of these things, and then because you find or you cherry picking all of this technology as a way to improve your life, now you leave them a technical debt. So the thing here is that again, especially in the React ecosystem or in the React applications, and as you scale that to adding more and more and more features, abstraction is generally the enemy when it comes to write good maintainable code. So that was the couple notes here. It is useful that it's on a separate file because now you can test it easily. So separate that your tests, or separate your custom hooks or your function letting as separate files, and don't do too much abstraction. And what you mean by abstraction is that you're putting wrappers around wrappers around wrappers around wrappers. Okay. And then we look at uncontrolled forms. How can we use it? Actually, we can make use of something called is uncontrolled forms. React hook form. They're using this library called React hooks. React hook form. Exactly, React hook forms, which is something that is being used. All right. Not only for React, but in React Native, which is great, powerful. By relying on form data. So is this. So what you're doing is to, well, change that. Which means that on default, on prevent here, this is what you're gonna do for that. We can use here is a wrapper to manage forms, which is React hook form, React hook forms. Okay. No, fuck. Oh snap. Okay. React hook form. What? React. Oh, I changed. Okay. Is this? Okay. Okay. Command option 1. What? Okay. In this case, command option 2. Easily. All right. Good, good. So far, so good, no problem. And then the uncontrolled forms and the class components. And what is the subtle difference between the functional approach and the class components? When you want to have fine-tuned performance, you can go with class components. And then some special case of React tools. Okay, error boundaries, modal and context. I'm gonna hit the break here because this is something that is widely used, widely misused in companies. They don't know then after down the line how to handle all of this stuff, you know. they find themselves in trouble when that's one of the reasons why a lot of these senior developers, tech leads, engineering leads, whatever it is, they make decisions that are trendy, which now adding more layer of abstractions, much more burden to maintain good, to write good maintainable codes, and then realize they now get out of that company per se. So yeah. So, and I see a particular pattern here with these fellas here, especially for people that are in those leagues, right? But in any case, so judgment here is something crucial. Judgment here is what you are looking for, is what also companies are looking for. So in any case, because of that, okay, this special case of React tools, of the error boundaries, the error boundaries, the models, and the context. So for example, in the case of the error boundaries, it's like this is something that you want to, I'm just gonna read this. Regardless if you want it or not, sometimes you end up with errors in your components. So this can be malformed API response. If you're using React query for that, it's not delegating to them, all right? The one that I have typically see the most, okay? Things outside of your control. So for example, user-generated input. So error boundary is aimed to capture is error that happening in your components. Okay. So a way to defend, so yeah, you can be kind of defensive with something called error boundaries. So a good example of this is I'm building this entire app pet adopted, and another SaaS is built in React. Is building Next.js, which use React. Next has some error boundary at the top of your app, so you can catch your errors and say, hey, there is an error in your app, here you can fix it. Not only that it can capture this error, but you can capture these errors and then send to a error report service in production. Okay. Whether it is, I think they don't put any name here. No, but I should. Okay, so this will cut. So your React app doesn't always need an error boundary, but it's frequently helpful. Functional components can cut error unlike class component. Component did catch. This will cut rendering errors at runtime, so you can log the error to an error report service in productions. Error report service in productions like LogRocket. Okay. LogRocket, another error report service in JavaScript. I think it's Bugsnag. Yeah, this is this one. Sentry, exactly. Track.js, exactly. And LogRocket, okay. Rollbar, Matomo, Sentry, Bugsnag. Okay. Exactly. Try Bugsnag, JavaScript error monitoring and reporting. Exactly. When something goes wrong in any of your components, so for example, API malformed API, Okay. Modal Form API response. Okay. The one that you have typically seen the most. Modal Form API response, which means that you're receiving is data that doesn't match. Okay, Modal Form API response, or things outside of your control, which is, for example, the user input. Okay, you can have or you can be kind of defensive with something called error boundaries. So again, these error boundaries, they are useful to capture errors on your components. Most of the time is this kind of errors. Okay, so a functional component can catch errors unlike class components. This is another difference here. Component did catch. And throw an error during re-rendering. Okay, component catch. Okay, so but now let me actually is this. Let me actually add this in production. Okay, such as track.js. Okay, such as track.js. What is the other? LogRocket, track.js, Bugsnap, bugs. Let me close this. Bugsnap, exactly. So Bugsnap here. How do you name that? Bugsnap. 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 Yep. Bugsnap. Are you gonna open that properly? Exactly. Bugsnap. Sentry. Exactly. And all of these servers, what they're doing is that whenever something goes wrong on the client, they're going to send a request to their servers to say, hey, and then log that. Whether it's on the client or on the server as well. Or in the server as well. Exactly. You can also use is LogRocket as well. Deloitte. Identify technical and UX issues with your AI, with our AI. Quantify impact with analytics and then watch season replays to see exactly what went wrong. That's interesting. That's very, very interesting. That's very, very interesting. But you can see is this. So they actually can able to capture those errors and send that. So Sentry is another one. Okay. What is that? Okay. Okay. Is Sentry. No. Come on. Okay, exactly like Sentry here, and Locked Rocket. Why Locked Rocket? Because this is something that and a Locked Rocket. This Locked Rocket, yeah, they just Locked Rocket. So this is something Locked Rocket. Yeah, so this is something that by using this special React cases or special case React tools like error boundary. Okay, when you want to detect errors that happen outside of your control in your React components, so for example, user inputs, or something that is typically seen the most, Modal Form API response. So you want to be kind of defensive of this. So we use error boundaries. And for applications or for frameworks like Next, it actually comes with error boundaries by default. So the point of this is once you're able to understand that, how you going to set that error boundary here. So for example, here, this is how you can set this error boundary here. Using is the React router. For example, here you define is this error boundary from the component. Then you, again, all of this is coming from the error boundary, the error boundary. Really, anyway, the error boundary in React. Okay, this particular code, what you're doing is to extend that from the component of React and define is couple of functions here. Okay, and you're going to wrap them as a regular that. So you might wonder where you want to place this. The granularity of error boundary is up to you. You may wrap top level route components to display or something when run message to the user. And again, in our particular case, we wrap them at the top level as a way to detect any errors and then do something about it, right? What to show is an error page for that. So as you can see here, this is how you can define this, get the state, which is something that comes from the this class, from the components. All right, update state that has, so the next render will show the fallback UI. Okay. And then on component did catch, what you're gonna do is to, on that particular hook, send that to whatever log error you might want to use. So in this particular case, because we didn't do that, okay, we're going now is to render that. If there is an error, you're gonna show that and a link to redirect that. If not, you're gonna render is the proper React components or the entire trip for that. So again, this is important to understand that this is part of the special case React tools. Error boundary is one of them, and understanding is the value proposition of error boundaries, as well as models, okay, as well as models, because the way how you can create models, and this is something that models can be quite bad for UI UX experience, But even though here models allow you to create this particular UI, in order to render this, you need to create is outside of the normal render tree as a way to show them. So that's why we define is this as an ID model here, and then we need to find a way to tell React to wrap these elements and construct our models for that. Again, models is also coming from the React, models in React. React model documentation here. React Native, no. Anyway. That's why a lot of people are using is this as a way to say, hey, yeah, I don't want to do that over and over and over. Anyway, so here we create our model here, as well as using something called create portal. So here, this is the create portal in React, is what allows us to say, hey, go to this. So render an element that is in a different part of the DOM. Yep. So then in our detail we can call is this model for that. And then you can define is the error boundaries as a way to say or to show a specific error here. Okay. Models, and here is the create portal. Okay. Create portal here. Yep. Create portal. All right. Yep. Create portal. And in the model GSX, like so. Okay. So after I look at this React special, or this special case React tools, the last one is also one is very, very important here. Context. Context. Right now we have been looking at local state. Okay. So we define a state in our React component. So far, so good. But what if you want is, for example, a state that is being used across different React components, UI components? Sometimes we have global state for data management, for example, that cares about the users at the top level. But small applications like this, it makes sense to define one top level state at root level for small applications. So, but for 40 web pages and 39 of them cares about what user do, the other is the about page. Context will be very useful here, this top level app state. So this put at the end of the lesson of this course, and I don't want you to people rely on heavily on this for everything. Hey, I got an state, let's make available everywhere. That's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. You really want to be judicious of where the states goes. Again, that's what is important. Judgment here. Judgment is something important, especially if you're going to write applications to make your life much more simple, bro. That's the entire reason here. Put the life, put your life, put, make your, make you from, make you from the future grateful of what you have done. That's a good thing. Make the you from the future. Make the you from the future thank you for doing that. That's right. Make the you from the future, yeah. Make the you from the future thank you about that. So, judgment, and we talk about is context. So, it can be hard to know where it came from because context introduces these indirections in your app. And if you take a look at some other code bases, okay, so for example, like this, when you see, okay, where did you add all of this? So where is the context here? So because the way how they did this, they don't even rely on, here they don't even rely is on yeah, here they don't even rely is on context, state and dispatch. Yeah, they don't even rely on context. They don't even rely on context. You know? They don't even rely on, okay. So, in any case, the thing here is that you have to remember that, especially with context, if you think that, hey, I got an state and I want to make it available to everyone, that's a bad idea. That's a bad idea. You have to be really judicious about where state goes. You want to be curious about where the states go. And with that, you say, hey, how can I make use of this? Okay, so for small applications, use context, it'll make more sense. But for it'll make more sense. But for example, exactly. But for example, so for simple states shared across your application, for example, 1 state, 2 states, that's good. But if you starting to increase the amount of context or state in your context, you quickly realize all of these indirections. TypeScript here is something that is helping you to build these scalable applications for that, which is something good. But again, the decision making here is important in your professional life and life, in your profession and life, right? So this is how we can create is a context here, okay, where you say, hey, I'm going to create is this context, where that context it can have a couple things. Okay. exactly, for example, this. So I create is this context for that. And the provider as well. All right. So here we are looking is at this, how we can create that, and then as a way to call that, we need to say, hey, this is the way how we're gonna add this provider to this. So in this particular code, so in this particular code here, adopted pet context of provider. It's like take a look at the entry point here. Where here we're supposed to have is all of this, exactly, all of this, exactly. So all of these providers. And providers allow you to access to that, so make that state available. So as a way to make use of that, this is how you can now make use of that state. Okay, so for example here, it show in a very easy way, use context, okay, because there might be component that we must rely on that. So for example here, exactly, they're passing us a lot of this. There's an error boundary here, exactly. Top level error boundary. Okay. Screen orientation and that kind of thing. So right. So this is the way how you can make use of a context. Again, as a way to share state across different components. So for example, for small applications, you might use context, might be a good way. But if you have, for example, needs to share a state, the users across 39 views, and one of them is about, but you might want to share that data to the about, so you can show that data. Anyway, in any case, the idea here is you want to share that. This will lead you to a lot of indirections. One of the great things of this, all right, is that you can rely on other things like Redux and other data state or state management pattern. But the point here is to recognize that decision making is important, especially as you starting to grow your application and you handling a lot of these states. And in the case of context, the better you can use your state, the better you can reuse the existing tools without creating another additional wrapper or additional abstractions, the better off will be. That's one of the reasons why we look at the word of abstraction and how to write maintainable React code and have a happy life as a React developer. All right. Okay. Okay. I think that was quite good. It was quite interesting. Okay. Yep. Yep. Totally. 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 So that'll be all for this video. Okay. Take care. Bye bye.